Welcome to the Slow Living Collective podcast. I'm Amy, wife, mother of two, and a homemaker by choice. Around here, slow living isn't a trend or an aesthetic, it's a lived seasonal rhythm, and it's a gentle revolution. In these episodes, I share reflections on living at a human pace, tending to our small home, growing food on a balcony and at the allotment, and finding joy in the ordinary days. This is a space to question default, to step out of the rush and to choose a quieter, more intentional way of living. If you're ready to join the unhurried revolution, then you're in the right place. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Slow Living Collective podcast. I'm Amy, and today I want to talk about enoughness. And I want to talk about enoughness and mindset, and not in a woo-woo way. I want to do it gently, because I know for many people this is a tender place to be. So I want to talk about enoughness not as a mindset, because enoughness is often spoken about as if it's something that you just need to decide, as if once you shift your thinking, everything will settle, and as if the discomfort that you feel is a misunderstanding that can be corrected. I don't know if you had the right perspective, maybe. But for many people, the struggle with enoughness isn't cognitive, it's structural, it's relational, and it's embodied. And I think it deserves to be met with care and not instruction. Because I often talk about things feeling like enough, like this is enough for me, my home is enough for me, being a homemaker is enough for me, like these things are enough. But I think when enoughness is framed as a mindset, it becomes another expectation and another thing that we feel like we've got to practice correctly. And you know that I am not about that. It's just, I don't know, another way to measure yourself. Like, am I content enough yet? Am I grateful enough? Am I doing slow living properly enough yet? And I think that can be really exhausting, especially if your life already asks quite a lot of you. And, you know, for most people, our lives ask a lot of us, right? And I don't think most people struggle with enoughness because they're ungrateful or they're overly attached to wanting more or anything like that. You know, in my previous episodes, I've spoken about living small. I've spoken about my feelings around homemaking. I don't think people are ungrateful or overly attached to wanting more. I think they struggle because their lives are genuinely demanding, and because they're holding a lot of things. It might be work and parenting or caring responsibilities in general, emotional labour, uncertainty, all at the same time. And it's because the systems and society that we live inside is fast, and it is rarely designed with a human capacity in mind. And when you're living inside that kind of pressure, being told to just feel like what you have is enough, it can sometimes land deeply invalidating. I know that. And I know when, I've been talking about subjects, particularly about living small, my house feels enough because it does feel enough. But it didn't always feel enough, right? And I think if I just came out and said why do you live in a big house? Because a small house should feel enough for you. I mean, I don't think that way at all, of course. But, it would be invalidating to you, wouldn't it? So, enoughness isn't just this kind of thought or a mindset that you insert into your life somewhere. It's just something that grows when life just feels a little bit more habitable. And what I mean by that is, and I'm going to use small home living as an example, but you don't just say this should be enough for me, so poof, there we go, it's enough for me. You have to work through all the other things. You have to work through some of the feelings that you might have about the way you thought your life might be, or you might have to work through the way society views you. I am still not 100% comfortable with the way that people think about living in a small home. It still irritates me a little bit, I will be honest. And, my goal is just to educate and say, actually, this is pretty cool. I really enjoy it. and I'm genuinely happy here. But I don't know that society believes me, if I'm honest. But back to enoughness. What I mean when like life becomes more habitable is as you decide like this life, it feels like a lot. I think I am going to start seeing if I can implement slowness in it somewhere. How can I do that? And everything that I do and talk about and educate on is all about fitting it inside an ordinary life. That is my entire goal. I don't want you to ever come to my page or come to my podcast and think like, that looks good for her, but I don't think I can do it. I also don't want you to feel like you have to do it, but what I want you to be able to see is if you see something and say, no, that looks pretty cool. She looks like she's nice and relaxed. Well, number one, I'm probably not that relaxed. But number two is I want you to be able to see whatever it is and say, that looks like that would fit inside my ordinary life. And that's all I want this, whatever the Slow Living Collective is what I want it to be, is to not ever make you feel bad about yourself or ever make you feel like it's too much or that it's unattainable. I want you to feel like the life you already have is spectacular, right? It's your one and only life. It is spectacular. Even on the boring days, even when we're doing the hoovering, is spectacular. And I want you to be able to adopt the things that you want to adopt and disregard the rest. And I want you to be able to take those things and fit them into the wonderful, beautiful life you already have. Your human life. I don't want anything to feel like, oh, I've got to perform that, or look at me, like doing this, doing that. It doesn't have to be aesthetic. It just has to feel good to you. And so for me, enoughness has never sort of arrived as this sort of like sudden feeling of contentment. It's always arrived slowly, consistently, quietly, through a series of decisions that have made my life easier to live inside of. And that can be things like decisions to like stop adding to your life, to stop expanding, to stop treating growth as the default. And slow and intentional living, as I practice it, has never really been about reducing life to something smaller or more aesthetic. It's about reducing the strain. And that applies, I think, I hope, in almost everything I talk about. And it's about asking questions like, this is my life. What can I soften? What can be simplified without losing something? And what can be allowed to stay as it is? And enoughness began to appear not when I told myself that I should be satisfied, but when I stopped asking myself to perform and just let it be. Things like when I let my home be supportive rather than impressive, when I disregarded what everybody else thinks that I should have moved, right? They didn't live here, so they don't get a say. It's when I let my work fit inside my days instead of spilling over them. That's been a big one for me, and I'll come back to that in a minute. And when I allowed my energy to be a real consideration and not an inconvenience. And going back to what I just said about fitting my work inside my days instead of spilling over them, I come to that with a little privilege because I work for myself. But, my brain is always buzzing. It always wants to create. I feel very lucky that I am creative in that way. I've been a writer for 20 years and I feel like I'm really lucky. I'm really lucky, but, over the last couple of years, I've been trying some different things. And I think what I found is I've been able to better work in the last year with my brain and understanding how my brain works and why it is the way it is and how I can work better with that. So something I do quite frequently is when it comes to the podcast, I batch record. I have been sitting here for hours recording this current series. I am about halfway through. And so I'll probably do it in 2 sittings, and bish bash bosh, it'll be done. And then I am not even planning on releasing this for a couple of months yet. And that'll give me time to use another piece of hyperfocus to get it all scheduled and set up, and then it will just run. And while it's running, I'm not working. So it's just about finding the ways that work for me, and just making it so it fits inside the life I have, not any other kind of life, not anybody else's life. Nobody would work the way I work, because they're a different person. Even if they have the same brain as me, they are a different person. But so I've kind of learned that enoughness is sort of deeply tied to pace. And when our lives are constantly accelerating, enoughness it can't find a space. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because there's just no space for enoughness to settle. And slowing down just creates conditions where I feel like it can be felt and not forced. And this is where slow living really becomes less about your lifestyle, about the relationship you have with time, capacity, and with the season that you're in. Not just the physical season outside your window, but the season of life that you're in as well. And I've always maintained this, that slow living is not about, just doing less for the sake of it. It's about doing things at a pace that allows you to notice when something is already sufficient. And I think noticing that can be quite subtle, and it might look like realizing that you don't need to set another goal right now, or your home doesn't need to be upgraded to feel supported, or that your life as it is actually doesn't need defending or explaining, because enoughness just arrives through permission. And that can be things like permission to pause without guilt, stop striving without fear, to let this season be about maintenance rather than momentum. You can't be in a momentum phase all the time. It is not possible. And I think that permission is rarely given to us externally. We usually have to offer it to ourselves, and we usually have to offer it to ourselves again and again and again. And so it's important that enoughness doesn't mean that you'll never want more. And wanting more is equally not a failure of enoughness. And longing for something isn't a lack of gratitude. Sometimes wanting more is simply a signal that something needs some care, rest, or attention. It might not need expansion. It might need expansion. None of this is a failure if that's where you end up. Because I want you to understand that enoughness doesn't ask you to suppress your desire. It asks you to listen to it more closely. It asks you to understand it and to respond with discernment rather than urgency. And I think this is where enoughness and intentional living sort of intersect. Because intentional living isn't about curating the perfect life. It is about making choices that support you where you are in the season that you are actually in, not the one you're supposedly supposed to be aspiring to. And enoughness, therefore, grows when your life reflects your values, even if it's imperfect, and when your days are shaped around what matter to you rather than what's expected of you. And it grows when you stop treating your life as provisional, as if it's something you're constantly preparing to upgrade. So for me, personally, enoughness has been about letting my life be solid, letting it stand where it is, let it be real, let it be sufficient without it needing to be more impressive. And actually, I think more than ever, I've been really pulling back over the last year and just allowing my life to be ordinary. And the ordinary is perfect, actually. It doesn't need to be any more than it is. And so I think, if you're listening and you're thinking like, I understand the idea of enoughness, but I don't feel it. I want you to know that doesn't mean you're failing at living slower or living more intentionally. It doesn't mean that you haven't done the work. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. it might simply just mean that your life is still asking a little too much of you. And, it's not something you can think your way into. It's something that emerges when your life begins to meet you with a little more gentleness. And that's not a mindset shift. That's a way of living. So it's living slowly, intentionally, and with care for the human, you, that's inside of it. So I hope today's episode gave you something to think about, and I hope it was helpful to you. You can find all the information and show notes for today's episode over on Substack. You can find me there, theslowlivingcollective.substack.com. You can also come find me over on Instagram. That is @theslowlivingcollective. And I will catch you in my next episode.